One, two, three, go.
Hello, everybody. Today we are interviewing the famous, renowned Michael Gellman, who is an improviser, an author, a teacher who wrote the classic book, Process, An Improviser's Journey, who was artistic director of Second City Toronto and is artistic director of Process Theatre in Toronto. And I'm delighted that he's here because we're trying to give out more information about particularly dramatic improv. And Michael actually was given a mission by Del Close to create improvised one act plays of literary quality from scratch, while Duluth, the improvised soap opera, isn't producing plays. We are producing soap operas from scratch that will be on YouTube in May. And so Michael is the perfect person to talk to. Hi, Michael. Thanks so much for coming. And thank you also for being my teacher and teaching me so much about characterization.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Interested in hearing, first of all, what your definition of dramatic improv is, because we have found, in fact, one of the reasons why we're doing this is that there's next to no information out specifically about dramatic improv. Now, you have your book out, true, but when we were looking for articles, podcasts, things like that, there's a lot on impro sports. There's not that much on dramatic improv. So, could you address that?
Well, yeah, the original idea of long form was when I was up in Canada, and I was the artistic director of the Second City up there, and I had the keys, so I could open it up whenever I wanted. So I opened up a free class to actors to come, and people would come from Stratford, which is a Shakespeare festival here in Canada, and people would come every Saturday, and we'd start working on improvised one act plays. And because you had to be on, at the time, almost all the improvisation anywhere in North America was, and I think to a degree in Europe, was comedic. It was beginning, middle, and end scenes, whether those were 12 minutes or 5 minutes or 3 minutes, blackouts, songs, review style comedy. So improvisation was synonymous with that kind of comedic, short improvisation where the lights went up, a scene, lights came down, lights went up, scene, lights came down, song, scene, song, blackout, blackout, scene, black. It was a running order, 2 acts usually, sometimes 1 act. And so that was when anybody said improvisation, that's what they talked about. And it was denigrated. If you were doing improvisation, you weren't doing real theater. You were doing like a circus. It was like you were in a sideshow of the circus, and considered a second-rate actor and a second-rate creator. And reviews had been done before in the 20s. They were really popular with like the Algonquin Round Table in New York, which was fabulous, but they were written. And so places like Minneapolis, Dudley Riggs, where I started as a excuse me, written theater. So it was 3 guys from the Minneapolis Star and Tribune who wrote the reviews, and then the actors acted them. But improvisation came along about 10 years after it started, and sort of revolutionized that kind of theater around North America. So the idea of sustaining a character for 30, 40 minutes and creating a play was a really exciting thing. And so we called it long form. And then I brought it back to the U.S., and Sharna was just starting Improv Olympic. She had been working with Improv Olympics with David Shepard, and sort of took it over and made it Improv Olympics. And she hired Del Close, who had just been fired from Second City, to be the artistic director or the director. And I had just came into town. So I started teaching classes, and Del started teaching classes at what was to become IO. And Sharna said, well, Del is doing Heralds and you're doing long form. So we're going to call your classes long form, and Del's we're going to call Herald. And that way the students will know the difference. And that's how she advertised And she also created improv, which was kind of interesting because it was improvisation. There was no,
Oh.
it was like Kleenex. There was no improv, right? And but she only had enough money for 1/8-inch ads in the underground paper. So she had to find a way to fit all the words into the little tiny rectangle in the newspaper. And so she said, "Well, if Keith Johnstone can call it impro, I can call it improv." So she made improv around a little circle, and that was the logo, and it fit. And then so Sharna was really instrumental in creating things like long form, utilizing long form, utilizing Herald, utilizing improv, and sort of as marketing tools. I mean, almost all the I think innovations in improvisation have come because either people had no money or the lights didn't work very well. You know?
Now, when you think about the type of improv, I guess that we're doing, we think of it as dramatic improv. David Razowski said it would be called unscripted improv. Do you still think of it as long form improv? Because it's hard to know what the terms are. I could not even find a definitive definition for dramatic improv.
Well, that's because someone made it up somewhere. I mean, it's like it's not. There's no like official improvisational institute that says yes, these terms are okay. So long form became whenever the lights weren't turned out. Dell came to me one day and said, uh, uh, Harold's lasted about an hour, and student shows were going for till 3, 4 in the morning. And and Sharna said, "You get a show every week if you're a student." And so she went to Dell and said, "You've got to find a way to get these Heralds shorter." And Dell came. We were having breakfast, and he says, I think I've finally figured out a way to get Herald to the lowest common denominator and still call it a Herald." Like, okay, what do you got? And so he used David Shepard's scene tag and time dash, which he had created for IO, to be the model. So it was scene, 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 blackout, second set of 3 scenes, blackout, third set of 3 scenes, blackout. And he said, and usually the last one was like a group scene. So it was like 3 scenes, group scene, 3 scenes, groups. And that was about a half an hour every time. So that's how they became student shows. But it wasn't the original Herald that was created by, Herald was created by the San Francisco Committee. So how does that get you back to dramatic improv? It's, first of all, I like improvisation. I mean, it's all terminology, but improvisation is kind of a craft, and I think improv is sort of like a short abbreviated and I suppose it's okay. I mean, is it gasoline or gas? Who cares? So long as everybody knows what everybody else is talking about. Originally, dramatic improvisation was coined, I think, to counter the fact that everyone considered improvisation comedic. And so, like, we're creating stuff where we don't expect necessarily laughs from the audience. We're trying to create something that would be equivalent of any other play that you would see on or off Broadway. So if we're doing that, then it's more dramatic theater. So dramatic versus comedic. Now Walter Kerr says that those two phrases should be reversed. He says, the hero is well, I won't go into the theory, but it's a wonderful book called Comedy and Tragedy by Walter Kerr, who used to be the New York Times theater critic. It's a brilliant book, and it examines the difference between comedy and drama and how we reference them in the United States and what happens to the characters in each that define what they are. I think it's fascinating.
What kind of preparation do you think people should get who want to be doing dramatic as opposed to purely comedic improv?
Well, maybe I'm being a heretic, but I think if you want to do theater, you need to train to be an actor. Period. And I don't care if you end up doing clowning or straight up straight what we used to call legitimate theater, or musicals, or dance, or ballet, or clowning, or improvisation, or if you really want to be good at the craft of acting, study acting. And improvisation is, I think, just a sort of a cousin to acting. It's a branch of acting. It's a style of theater, no different than clowning or commedia or any of the others. Absurdist. It's all theater.
For
So
people who are not majoring in theater but are coming into improv as rank amateurs, as many people are, what kind of acting classes do you suggest that they get?
beginning doesn't take a lot. And there's, obviously, from reading, the Stanislavski is a great place to start. The books I recommend are An Actor Prepares, even though Stanislavski changed his mind about it. I still find it to be a valuable book. Uta Hagen's books, Audition by Michael Shurtleff, all good books. A basic acting class that perhaps Meisner might be a little advanced for people who just want to be hobbyists. I mean, improvisation became at some point a few different branches, and it became something that was like human development for people who just want to, like, play and be creative, which I think is 90% of improvisation, is people who want to explore maybe their own potential as human beings as much as anything. And then there's the definite professional core of equity actors who participate in improvisation as to make a living. And then there's the other branch that kind of help business people, and what Dell used to call civilians. To it is about communication and listening and sharing and empathy and giving to your partner. And the reason it's so attractive, I think, is because it has so many really incredible, lovely things about how we can change our behavior as human beings, and interact with each other and give a damn about each other, and have and share experiences, and create story. I mean, that's something that goes right to the core of our DNA as human beings. And improvisation has been around for thousands of years, and Bernie Sahlins, who owns Second City, one day we were talking, and he says there's actually only been about four 100-year periods where all of our what we call theater has come from. Right? It's like these golden ages of man where there's lots of theater and plays are written, and then the church or the government or somebody closes it down, and we have the dark ages for 1,000 years, and then theater pops back up. And he says there's only a few short periods in human history where all of what we call theater comes from. He says, but what we do, referring to Second City and improvisation, says that's been going on nonstop for thousands of years. That never shut down like other theaters. So the idea of people going from town to town, and people making up stuff, and kids going, here's the truth of the hunt, around a campfire, and all the things we do as human beings to share our stories, to share our experiences, is part and parcel with improvisation, because you don't have to script, you don't have to write, you don't have to, how many millions of people throughout the last 2,000, 3,000 years have not been able to write, but they can improvise and they can create story. And they did, and they do.
I know I've been taking classes with you in characterization and how to create characters. Be interested in hearing your thoughts, on how people can create characters. I've had the wonderful courses that you teach. I want other people to learn from.
You want to know the simple answer? Watch
Yeah,
your friends.
watch your
Watch,
friends.
watch people. I mean, ultimately, when I don't know, this is too simplistic by far, but the idea that our job as actors is to create human beings that people for an hour or so can suspend their disbelief and believe you are who you say you are. I'm a pirate. Okay, good. I believe that, and I will believe that for the next hour and a half. And so how do we really learn how to behave? Well, it's the same way anybody else. It's our survival instincts. We watch people. And whether that's family or friends, we can watch. I mean, we watch people. We have films and television nowadays. I mean, think about it. We have 100 years of the best acting in the last 100 years. And so if you really want to learn how to act, go watch good actors do it. That's how people used to learn how to act. They'd get a tiny waiter role and they'd sit in the wings and they'd watch the master, go out and do the big roles. And after years of studying someone else doing it, they went out and then they took a bigger role. Now they were the co-star. And then eventually they'd get their own troupe. So, I mean, how did actors for thousands of years learn how to act? By watching really, really good actors do it. And that's how we all learn, right? That's it. And so I have this opportunity to watch some of the best acting of the last 100 years, and I have rewind. So some guy who had to sit in the wings 100 years ago and watch someone do Hamlet over and over again till he figured out how to do it. Well, we can do that in like 2 nights. We just have to rewind, watch it, rewind it again, say, what did he do? Oh my God, he turns his head left, then right, then he says his line. Jeez, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And so we can watch master acting. We can have classes online. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that we can do as individuals to learn how to be good actors that were not available to us even 20 years ago. And what an opportunity. So if you think about it, you're just supposed to pretend you are somebody else and get the audience to believe you for an hour and a half. And you did the same thing when you were 5 years old. Maybe you did it better because you were pretending to be the princess or the cowboy or the space guy.
If somebody was doing like what I'm doing, I have a character, I know what my character is. My character was assigned to me by our director, Joe McGinley, and it's a newspaper person, and it's a publisher, owner of a newspaper. What would your suggestions be for how I can fill out the character? And I have to say, I've been doing a lot of things I've learned in your classes anyway, but I want other people to hear about what you see as the process for something like this.
Well, I don't know because I don't know exactly what you have to do. And so it's a question that's very, very difficult to answer because it's so individualized. But certainly to understand the nature, I mean, you do all those things that any other actor does for any play. You fill out a biography, likes, dislikes, things you find out as much as you can about Duluth publishing. I mean, if it's supposed to be in Duluth, do you know all the newspapers that have been in Duluth since Duluth started and who published them and what they were? And find out.
These things are obvious to you, Michael, as somebody who comes from theater. For a lot of people who don't come from theater, the amount of research that goes into a role is a shock to many people in improvising because they think that they're used to just creating something on the spot, not realizing that at least in these kinds of circumstances, if you're improvising a play or a soap opera or something that's set in a certain place and you have a certain character, you still need to know things. You need to have done some preparation, not just go when they're on the fly.
Well, and there is a whole school. I mean, a lot of the stuff in my book is about creating one act from scratch. So you don't have anything, you don't have a character, you just jump into stage, start discovering, and build a character, build a relationship, build a story moment to moment to moment over 20, 30, 40 minutes. And it's a really fun way to improvise. There's other ways to improvise, right? With I mean, the original Second City was Compass Players. They started using scenarios where someone would bring in the exoskeleton of a story. They'd rehearse it for a day or two, and then put it up over the weekend. And they'd make new plays up every week. That's fun too. And that way you'd have a little bit of a character, more like what you're doing in Duluth. Another way to improvise that I'm really fond of is literary source, where you can read the book and go, oh, the author has about 100 things they say about my character that I can use to have an understanding. But so what do we have to do to pretend to be another person? I mean, whether you're in a con game or a theater or you're just trying to impress a date, what things do you have to do in order to convince that other person that you are who you say you are? So I think the more scrutiny it has, and it depends how you frame it, doesn't it? In terms of audience, it's like, hey, audience, we're going to do a completely improvised show. Give us an environment, give us a relationship, thanks, and go. Well, the audience will forgive a lot because they don't hold it to as high a standard, although they should. In something like Duluth, well, you say, okay, now we've got an exoskeleton and we've got specific characters. So I've got to do a little bit more work as an actor in order to be able to pull it off, because the audience has a greater expectation that you are going to be this publisher, that you will be consistent from week to week, that you will have enough smarts in certain areas and enough information about the town, Duluth, enough information about the other characters and and your history with them. So if you've had an ally for 20 years and you're in Duluth, that's great. But what if you've had an enemy? So you're not just going to make this stuff up, I think, right? I think that you probably have, well, these people are friendly and these people are enemies or frenemies or whatever they are, right? And so I think you've got a lot more responsibility to your audience with something like Duluth to have a more substantive character, a character that is fleshed out more than just, hey, we're going to improv for you tonight. So just like, what would you expect of a soap opera? And then maybe one step more advanced, what would you expect of a Broadway play? There are two theater companies before COVID, as I understand it, who are doing improvised plays on the West End. Now, that's amazing, right? They were creating theater of literary quality, as Dell used to say, on the spot. But how much of that, and I don't have an answer, how much of that was with characters that they had determined before, that they had explored improvisationally, so when they went into a new scenario, it was still the same characters, but they were playing in different positions. One, an antagonist one night, a protagonist the next night. I don't know how much of it they made up from whole cloth and how much they didn't. But I know that in Duluth, you have an obligation to your audience, I think, to have a stronger character than just, hey, we're improing in the corner of a coffee house tonight.
As somebody who was, am I right that were you born in Minneapolis?
Yeah.
Yeah, who was born in Minneapolis, lived in Minnesota for a long time. What would you expect if you were watching Duluth? What would you expect to see that would let you know that these really are people who have an understanding of what the state and what this area is like?
Well, one thing I think, there's a few things. I think one thing is, there used to be a Dudley Riggs, which was a comedy theater in Minneapolis. We talked about before. One of my favorite titles of a show was "Being from Minnesota is never having to say you're Lutheran," which is kind of, so Minnesota is. You have to understand that Minnesotans think they are pretty much better than the rest of the United States. Minnesotans think and it's kind of because we are. Min- we're pretty Minnesotans are pretty darn cool, and 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 it's because we have this amazing diversity of we have the Mayo Clinic and Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing and cereal companies and tech Honeywell. I mean, Minnesota has some of the best education, the best technology, the best food manufacturing, the best medicine in the United States of America. So Minnesotans kind of going, yeah, we're pretty damn cool.
You make it sound like Minnesotans think of their state like Texans think of their state.
Only more so.
Wow.
I don't know if this is an indication, but one of the most important things, at least in retrospect, about Minnesota, in my humble opinion, is the Minnesota State Fair. It is an extraordinary experience. And if you've not from Minnesota, or even if you are and you've never been, I urge you to go check out the Minnesota State Fair. So, in answer to your Texas thing, it's interesting to note that the only state fair that's bigger than the Minnesota State Fair is Texas. Just say.
Okay. And I never would have guessed that. I've been to Minnesota. I had a son that went to the U. I passed by Duluth on the highway, but I didn't know all of these inside ways of
And
looking.
I don't know if, when I was growing up there, Duluth was always considered that northern outpost. It was kind of part of Minnesota and it was there and we were glad for it. And watch the lake, don't let anybody invade. But, but it was definitely the Arctic north of Minnesota. I'm making shit up. I don't know, but that's kind of how I remember people thinking of Duluth as kind of a northern outpost, where it is much colder more of the year than it is in Minneapolis.
So it sounds like I would be correct that if my character had moved from Minneapolis to Duluth, after a successful career at a paper like the Star Tribune, that would be quite unusual. People do not go from the big city to the
I don't
northern outpost in
know
general.
how much they drink. I mean, how badly did they screw up their career?
Yeah, yeah. But that would make people look at my character and say, I
No, I don't
wonder why she left.
I mean, I think if you were the editor of the gardening,
Yeah.
section of the Minneapolis Star or Tribune, depending, I don't know when your Duluth is placed. If it's modern day, it's the Minneapolis Star and Tribune. When I was growing up, there were two newspapers, an evening and a morning. One was the Star and one was the Trib. And they said, "Hey, we are offering you the editorship of, or if you were just a reporter." And wanted to stay in journalism, and they offered you a management position at a fairly. I mean, Duluth is not a
Yeah.
small
Yeah.
town. I would take it. I mean, hell, it would certainly be an elevation of responsibility and probably money. Duluth is cheaper to live in, so I would think that someone who had some success, if you were the editor in chief of the Minneapolis Star and Tribune, and you went. And then it depends. Are you retiring and just want something to do to keep from going crazy? And your kids live in Duluth, so you're retiring there, or are you like, a pothead who drinks too much, who goes, "That's the only job I can get. I'll move to Duluth. Get my mucklucks out." So I mean, in terms of and doesn't that all go back to acting? I mean, where we go, okay, well, wait a minute, what are the circumstances of this human being? How did they grow up? What kind of education do they have? Are they pursuing things because they have a desire, or are they tumbling down into a well? Do they have psychological problems? Do they think of themselves as do they have high or low esteem? What do they see themselves as their status? Do they walk into a room and go, "People respect me," or do they walk in going, "Gee, I hope they like me"? I mean, there's and there's all sorts of different things that you can explore. And the really great thing about acting, I think we mentioned this in the workshop I'm doing with you. To me, the most extraordinary thing about acting is that we actors get to explore the human condition. I mean, we're cultural anthropologists, psychologists, we're all of that rolled into one. And we have this incredible opportunity to examine the world we live in through its people in a way that most people don't. Most people just go through and try and get by as best they can. And they deal with, well, the neighbor's crazy, and I like my significant other, and but we are going, wait a minute, why does the bartender behave like that? Oh, wait a minute, why is my neighbor not making eye contact? Huh. Oh, you know what? I've done this for the last 5 years. Isn't that interesting? I didn't realize it till I started creating this character and realized, wait a minute, I'm doing the same thing this character does. I mean, we get a chance to examine the world in a way that anybody can, but most people, I think, don't. And I may be wrong on that. I mean, I'm wrong about a lot of
No,
stuff.
I think you're right. I mean, most people, I don't think, even examine their own motives that much. Certainly aren't examining other people's motives that much, especially people who are not that close to them.
And so, what happens when you have to play an asshole or an evil SOB? I mean, well, it's hard. It's why some actors go home and have a hard time after the play because they've had to dredge a lot of stuff up that's uncomfortable and nasty or treats people bad or whatever. It's negative. And
Yeah.
so it takes them like hours to shed that. They almost have to take a shower afterwards or some kind of. Anyway, it we we examine the world in a way that's, I think, extraordinary and unique and is a privilege, and we get to play those characters all the time. And one of the fun things about improvising is you can pull some of those characters out more often. You're not restricted by, well, I hope I get a play this season. You are like, hey, I create 10 characters a week and I keep doing it, and it's fun and it's great and I love doing it. And I think that's the great joy of improvisation.
Yeah.
Theater has always been a trap, hasn't it? I mean, theater is like a sticky trap, like a fly trap. You go in and you think, well, this looks kind of fun. And then all of a sudden, people like you. They're nice to you. You're surrounded by creativity, and then you're stuck because it's hard to leave that. That's pretty nice in life.
So I
That
have to say, I have met people not at this level, not at a level of improv in which you're doing plays and things, but at the earlier level where you play games. I've met people who've said, "I don't like theater. I don't understand how somebody who doesn't like theater would want to be taking acting classes, but it does happen."
Well, and you have to consider, well, what kind of theater are they talking about? Because there's
Yeah,
hundreds of different kinds of theater,
true.
and then you have to consider how much have they really seen good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's possible they haven't.
What
It's
do
very
they? How are
possible.
they defining theater? But there is a thing that says, well, improvisation is sort of poor man's theater. It's theater for it's theater for everyone. Anybody can do it. And it's true. Anybody can do it. And a lot of people should do it. But that doesn't make it good enough to expect people to come and watch.
Yeah,
So I think and maybe that's one of the goals of dramatic improvisation is to make the performance we create good enough that the audience will fall into the story. We used to say at Second City, if people come out of the theater saying, I think the tall guy's funny, I think the short guy's funny, we blew it. We didn't do our job. But if they walk out of the theater saying, I love that scene between the two brothers, then we've done our work true and well. And so and to me, that's theater. So you can say, well, I hate theater, and you're improvising, and you go off stage, and you go, God, that was great. I felt like the play was pulling me. I wasn't in control, and yet it worked, and the audience just loved it, and it moved that woman in the front audience to tears. And God, what a great experience. And you can go to them and say, dude, I thought you hated theater, because that's what you were just doing. And you say it feels so good. So, and it depends. Do you hate theater from the audience's perspective or from doing it? I don't know.
Yeah.
How many improvisational shows are attended by fellow improv students? And everybody in the room. And then some guy from the suburbs comes in and says, well, I came to see the show. And everyone looks at them like, what the hell are you doing here? Like, well, you said you were doing an improvisational show. I wanted to see it. Yeah, but you won't get it. Like, wait a minute, what? Really? So who the hell knows what they mean? But I bet you if they do improvisation for a couple of years, they change their mind because they realize it's theater, good theater's theater, and improvisation is synonymous.
Yeah. Michael, I am so appreciative of your coming, and I hope you will watch DULUTH when we premiere in May.
Of course.
And I appreciate all your teaching,
Well, send me
all your books, and as we were saying before, the person who created DULUTH, who is doing our tech today, Pete Musso, his intro last year into dramatic improv was your book. So thank you for being you.
Well, that's a privilege. Thank you. And thanks, Pete. I see your name on the screen because we're in little squares.
Thanks.
Thank you, Louise.
Awesome.
Okay, Pete, thank you. You can turn it off now, I think.
Thank
Yeah.
you. That was awesome. I'm going to leave it, just record a little bit more here because it's easier for me than if
Oh, okay, to cut
I
it.
have enough.
Yeah.
Cutting is tricky if I have a big piece. So there we are. We're going to stop